Here's an example of demand and supply and how we think about demand and supply in the case of the retail market for toothpaste in the US. In a retail market, almost all the buyers are consumers. If there are a lot of firms buying in a market, we call it a wholesale market. And toothpaste buyers, consumers who buy it, are buying actually not from the producers, they're buying from intermediaries, drugstores, grocery stores, other stores, and websites. The average price of toothpaste is about $4 a pound. The retailers are making a profit on average, so the way they do it is by charging a sale price that's higher than their cost, what they're paying the producers to supply the toothpaste. So the markup, that's the name for the fraction of their cost, which they add on to that cost to get their sale price. So here's a formula for it. Their sale price minus their cost per unit as a fraction of the unit cost for them is the markup. Actual markups in the US retail toothpaste market ranged from 15% to 37% in 2015, and the average markup was 23%. Here's a little math exercise. We know that the average price of toothpaste is $4 a pound. Close to all Americans say they use toothpaste each day. The average user uses half a gram of toothpaste per day. So how much do US toothpaste users spend on average per week? That's a quiz question. So this involves changing a lot of units because what you know is the price, but it's a price in pounds per pound. Here that you have the amount they use, but it's in grams. So you have to figure out how much are they using per pound and then how much they're spending on that average use. Of course, this was grams per day. This question is asking about toothpaste per week. So you try to make all the changes and we'll discuss it. Here's an example of demand and supply curves. We usually draw them with demand downward sloping to the right and supply upward sloping as you move to the right. Now, we will discuss reasons for drawing them like that, but the main thing here is that the toothpaste demand and supply almost for sure do not look like this. They're quite different, but how are they different? And how do we tell how the demand and supply curves probably look for toothpaste? How do we decide how a demand curve should look? Well, we could test this demand curve and see if its guesses seem to be reasonable. So suppose we look at a price of $5 a pound instead of $4 a pound. That's 1/4 higher, 25% higher price. Would that lead Americans to buy this much less of toothpaste? This looks like maybe a 40% drop in the amount of toothpaste that they would use. So you can try to think, is that a reasonable guess? Or if the price was 1/4 less, 25% lower than the $4, would they buy about 40% more toothpaste than they normally buy when the price is at its average of $4 a pound? This slide shows more precisely what the demand curve guesses about Americans' demand at another price, $6 a pound. That's 50% higher than $4, the average price. And the prediction in this demand curve is that Americans would buy very little. They'd buy 15% as much toothpaste as they do when the price is $4 a pound. Now you could ask, is that a reasonable estimate? And one thing it could depend on is, how does this higher price of $6 a pound affect buyers' average weekly cost of toothpaste, and why does that matter? So those questions should help you make another estimate of what would be demanded at a price of $6 a pound, and from that you could try drawing a better demand curve. Here's another quiz question. What does this demand curve guess about how much the buyers would want to buy if the price was only $2 a pound compared to what they do buy at $4 a pound? Is it less, 40% less, or the same, or 10% more, 40% more, 70% more? You can tell by looking at the graph. The amount more that they would buy is represented by this red arrow. Try writing down your guess about how much more toothpaste U.S. buyers would buy if the price was only $2 a pound instead of $4 a pound, half the price, and explain why you guess that. Now let's look at the supply curve. What is it that tells us how much sellers would like to sell, or would choose to sell, if they could only sell their units at the given price? So suppose sellers can sell as much as they want, but they can't charge any more than $2 a pound. How much would they want to sell then? The supply guesses that at a price of $6 a pound, if they could sell as much as they wanted, they would move out along their supply curve out to this point here. That means that they'd be offering for sale this amount more of toothpaste. Now, actually, with the information we have about this market, it's hard to say how sellers really would behave, but it does depend on something important, and that is the amount of time that we're talking about. If it's a week, they might not have much time to adjust the quantity that they offer for sale. If we're talking about a year or 5 years, then they have a lot of time. And then maybe the supply curve would be different from this in either of those cases. The supply curve also makes a guess about how much the sellers would be willing to sell or want to sell if they could not charge more than $2 a pound. It says that they would sell this quantity, this horizontal distance. Now that's still a large amount that they're willing to sell according to this supply curve. Question is that a reasonable guess? Now I want you to try to think about what you could use, what information would be important for deciding if this is a reasonable guess. What does it depend on? What information would help us decide if the guesses made in the blue supply curve are reasonable? Write down your ideas, and then you'll be able to compare what you're thinking now to what we find out when we study the supply of a relatively competitive firm like these retailers that are selling toothpaste. Here's a hint about that. What are the seller's costs? And how does that matter? Here's a question related to the costs of these sellers. There was a retailer who charged a 37% markup in the survey I mentioned. Now, suppose that they sold their toothpaste at $4 a pound. How much were they paying for the toothpaste that they sold? So what was their unit cost in that formula for the markup? You can figure it out using algebra. Just give a label for that unit cost, maybe call it C, and then solve for C using the formula. The markup is 37%, and their final price what they're selling it for is $4 a pound. So that should tell you the cost that they're paying to the producers for their toothpaste. And then you can use that to get information about whether the supply curve, the blue supply curve, is reasonable.